A city that financially prioritizes a military-grade police force over expanding public services is a city that should be ashamed of itself. Homeless shelters are in constant overflow, and instead of building sustainable infrastructure to house people, you allow local businesses to waste tax dollars calling officers to harass them. This city taught me the meaning of Kafkaesque. Caseworkers, doctors, and mental health professionals I encountered through Adam-provided services are overworked. You have consistently misappropriated financial resources meant for public health services and redirected them to policing the mentally ill. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. Choosing to fund the police with military-grade weapons and vehicles while leaving the educational budget of this city at bare minimum is so cruel and short-sighted. I take personal pride in the fact that I wasn't born here.
It is laughable that our police department would consider the protest downtown to be a civil disturbance necessitating these weapons. I don't know if any of you have attended a protest before, but they are often very tame. Allow me to paint a picture. You march around, you sing songs, you join in chants, you eat granola bars. There's a dude with a bongo drum. I don't know what cognitive dissonance it takes to think the police would need militarized weapons for an event like this, but it needs to stop. Black Lives Matter. Thank you for hearing me today. Fuck the police.
Police officers are the 18th most dangerous jobs in the United States. They're outranked by farmers, they're outranked by groundskeepers, they're outranked by truck drivers, garbage people, and fishermen. And so coming back to this rhetoric over and over again to justify militarizing police forces is ultimately really harmful, and I would encourage us not to do it.
The Minneapolis City Council has taken the necessary step of moving forward, not just on demilitarization, but on actually defunding Minneapolis PD. We have the same issues that Minneapolis PD has, and we need this city council to take the same steps.
Where, might I ask, was this degree of responsive policing when predominantly white protesters gathered at the State House last month, toting firearms and demanding haircuts in the midst of a global pandemic? How did that assembly not qualify as a potential threat when those armed with signs do? Where were the chemical agents and the riot gear then?
Demilitarize our police force. Please, we are not terrorists. We are not a domestic threat. We are demanding equal treatment under the law, and we are demanding that our police force be held accountable for their often deadly mistakes. Your entire community is traumatized. When your community cannot rest, how can they heal? And make no mistake, until there is justice, there will be absolutely no peace.
Our calls for justice, not just for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, but also Henry Green, Tyree King, and more, have been met by the very inciting, violent, militarized occupational forces that we're speaking out against in the first place. Beyond demilitarization, we need at least 50% of our police budget transferred to community programs that are making a difference at the structural level to break down the systemic barriers to achieve safety and success in our city. We are here because we're paying attention. The question now is, with all the attention on you, City Council, which side of history will you be on? What will you tell your kids and your grandkids about how you stood up in this moment? What will make that voter see your name on the ballot and knock on every single door she can, emphasizing what you've done for our city in this moment? How are you going to imprint your legacy as a fighter for the people that could last for decades after you're gone? The ball's in your court, Council, and the stands here are full.
Tell me, Mr. Farrell, how many times have you been shaken out of bed by the buzzing of a CPD helicopter? It's not rhetorical. I would like to know. It is clear, Mr. Farrell, that you and many of your union members are under the inaccurate impression that the mandates of your slave patrol predecessors to hunt down and capture Black bodies by any and every means available still remains in effect in 2020. They do not. It is my fervent prayer that Councilmember Brown and each member of Columbus City Council will enlighten you to this fact by removing every penny from the CPD budget that funds anything other than basic rudimentary law enforcement tools, a vehicle, a non-lethal taser, and with proper retraining, a firearm. You have forgotten that you work for the residents of this city, and this city, my Linden home, is not a war zone.
The police are a reactive force that ends up disproportionately penalizing marginalized citizens and those that have been driven to desperation, rather than solving their problems or relieving strain on these groups that would preclude their punished acts. I don't see a proper covenant between law enforcement and our citizens. I've had many completely unarmed friends assaulted by police while assembling and protesting over the years. In these situations, police presence wasn't even necessitated, let alone their acts of violence. If we were to purchase more equipment for enforcers, more of that equipment would inevitably be used, and given our track record, I cannot simply trust that they will be used well. Weapons don't solve problems, they end them.
During the civil rights movement in the 60s, officers beat protesters with batons, sprayed them with fire hoses, and sicked dogs on them. And I think most people you ask would agree that that was terrible. Now we have pepper spray, tear gas, and rubber bullets. But some people say, they shouldn't have broke the law. The values that resisted the civil rights movement are alive and well today, and they are being expressed through support for a militarized police force. Black Lives Matter. That's all.
I think it is a completely abysmal and it is gaslighting treatment to say that the event we were planning is the reason that Coda's car was towed. This is terrible. You cannot use the expectation of an event happening as reason to completely uproot people's lives and destroy their livelihoods. Fuck the police. Thank you for your time.
I do not support increased funding for tanks, weaponized vehicles, aircraft, grenade launchers, riot gear, large caliber weapons, battering rams, and any other weapons that would be used against the citizens of this city. We are not animals. Who we are people who need support, people who need to have the barriers of racism removed to get ahead, not more weapons to kill.
Let's focus on not making police strategies based on ideological fantasies that occur in hyperbole, but in empirical evidence of the present. I could come up here and give countless examples that support the conclusion that Councilwoman Brown and others mentioned about systemic racism, that America's past is rooted in the blood of many different types of people. But that's not my responsibility to come up here and spoon feed information about the history of this country. There are more pressing matters at hand that pertain to the communities of oppressed people. I don't know what protests you all have seen, but in Columbus, I was pushed to the ground and pepper sprayed point blank in the face without warning. That is the behavior of a schoolyard bully. And then I'm looked at as the instigator in the situation.
When the police shows up wearing outfits of war and, dressed in riot gear and numerous horses and bicycles and everything, I don't see the police as someone that's there to help me and keep me safe and keep me protected. I see them as, as a scary, intimidating group. And I think also that they don't seem to be looking at us as a community that they're trying to protect.
Justifying the camo as like the cops need to sneak around people's boxwoods or something, like that doesn't strike me as on the level either.
The uprising has caused our police to really be more focused on keeping law and order and having this military posture and having this attitude of us against them that really only exacerbates the challenges that everyone has talked about today.
The Columbus police have long been known to be excessively violent, particularly with Black residents, as documented by the Matrix report. The CPD has been called racist by some of its own Black officers. The CPD kills more residents and more Black residents per capita than most large police forces across the country. And it ranks first in the nation for killing Black residents if we restrict our attention to only cities with sizable Black populations. This is morally outrageous and unacceptable.
And I also want to affirm what Anissa Awad said about the medic's car being towed. It was at the Ginther rally. And, I wouldn't expect the deputy to know that. He struggles with things like getting his camera to work. And then my final question is for you, President Hardin. You told me a few weeks ago that the police in the city weren't going to use tear gas and pepper spray on peaceful protesters, except for in the instances of life-saving, circumstances. And that is, I've seen firsthand that that's not true. How can the public help you hold individuals accountable?
We see the investment of millions of our tax dollars in military-style weapons for a police force that has failed to even do what it takes to make sure their own officers are not the very people committing the crimes from which we, the people and taxpayers, need protection. These millions could be used for good in our communities.
I've trained various entities in the city, including the mayor and his advisors, on topics such as implicit bias and structural racism. One of the main tenets of quality anti-racism work is that trainings for individuals need to be paired with systemic overhaul, reforms, policy change, and continual accountability. That is where Columbus has been lacking and must have the courage to make real changes, including the demilitarization of so-called peacekeepers. Because residents having the audacity to exercise their First Amendment rights to free speech and peaceable assembly, to tell police to stop murdering Black people, threatens their right to kill residents without any accountability.
I am not merely advocating for the demilitarization of the CPD, I'm advocating for the disarming, defunding and eventual disbanding of the Columbus Division of Police. You mentioned that these testimonies should remain respectful. You've said police feel disrespected. They should. They don't deserve respect. I'm done hearing about wrong calls. I'm done hearing mistakes were made. I'm done with internal investigations and debriefs. I'm tired of feeling unsafe in my own city. I want these terrorists out and defunded.
There was a particular focus on the equipment when Woods answered their interest on what works well and not well for us, which I can only interpret is how can we make our violence more effective? Because there's an ongoing discrepancy between what the trained officers are required to know and provide by way of their profession and the responsibility of the people to display their traumas, just to initiate the possibility of potential discussion on tentative soon-to-be scheduled action.
Based on experiencing and witnessing police brutality from officers using military equipment and following existing procedures that are in place, I do not feel safe calling 911 in an emergency, as I expect officers who respond to cause further danger for myself or those around me, regardless of the situation. To whom do we turn when those who are supposed to protect us do the same thing as the people who are harming us?
Racist behavior is ingrained in our DNA. DNA changes based off of how our cells respond to the environmental influences. The effects of racism runs deep within us. Black folk have 400 years of racist trauma in our DNA. White folk also have 400 years of power and control in their DNA. It affects their every action. So they stand up to be heard. They respond in degrading, violent, and aggressive ways. Since George Floyd, this is the first time I have felt that I can speak to people and actually have them listen to me. I've had partners, friends, strangers, and people in the community that can't understand what we have to go through every day. And now people, white folk, are finally experiencing the traumas that Black and brown people have had to experience at the hands of over-aggressive cops for decades. My son, who has never experienced police violence himself, he is 12 years old. And for the past 3 years, when I leave the house, he doesn't say, "I love you." He says, "Don't die." He's 12 and he sees how we are treated. He sees how the cops overstep their oath to protect and serve the people. Just today, there was a group of bike cops who rolled up in our neighborhood, like 5 or 6 deep, and started walking up to people's houses. Me and my neighbors freaked out. We didn't know why they were here. They were here in full gear with their guns and their tasers to pass out a pamphlet saying that they are going to be supporting our community. That is not what we are asking for. I want my son to not say, "Don't die" when I leave the house. The police respond to us like they are overlords, not servants. As we deserve to not be harassed, we deserve to be heard, we deserve to have our rights, we deserve to not have our 12-year-old child say, "Don't die" when you leave the house. That is what we're discussing right now. It is institutionalized. It is built into our system. It's not just about guns. It's about how we're treated and how we're looked at every day. My son, who's 12, can get it, and God damn it, there's no reason why y'all can't get it. Fucking grow up.